Hello and welcome to the 5 Minute Film Club, and this time from the 501 Must-See Movies book is The Sweet Smell of Success, a dark and brooding noir from 1958. In the film we follow Sidney Falco, played by Tony Curtis, who is a press agent trying to climb the slippery ladder of journalism stardom. Sitting at the top of this ladder is J.J. Hunsecker, played by Burt Lancaster. He is the force of the Globe newspaper and their gossip column, and also has his own television show. What he says goes in this world of show business and even politics. He has the ability to make and break careers. We find Sidney in JJ's bad books at the start of the film, as JJ has given him the task of breaking up his sister's relationship with a jazz guitarist. However, he's failed to do so, and so Sidney is cut out of JJ's agent circle and will no longer print any of the stories he pushes his way, meaning that no one will pay Sidney for promoting them or their establishments. However, he is given one last chance to come true on his promise. And so, it is this journey that we witness in the film as Sidney tries, ever increasingly desperate and dark ways, to win his way back into JJ's favour. Sweet Smell of Success started life as a novelette in 1950, penned by Ernest Lehman. Lehman is now best known probably for his Oscar-nominated screenplays and his work with Alfred Hitchcock, in particular 1959's North by Northwest. However, he started life as a freelance writer and used his experience of dealing with the likes of publicity writer Irving Hoffman as the basis for Sidney Falco, and the basis for J.J. Hunsecker was definitely taken from Walter Winchell, a hugely influential gossip columnist from the 1930s to the 1950s. Like J.J. Hunsecker in the film, Winchell, with his column and radio show, seriously damaged people's careers. And in the 1950s, Winchell supported Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist hunt, which went particularly hard on the entertainment community. Winchell was someone you didn't want to cross. When the film was released, Winchell and Irving Hoffman would wander the lobbies of the film, apparently saying to passers-by how awful the film was. Just imagine what it would be like to step out of this film and then encountering the real-life Sidney Falco in full force, pacing up and down the foyer. However, times were changing in Hollywood and the old studio model was collapsing. The rise of television and the disconnections between movie studios and the cinemas they owned meant that movie stars could start demanding more control. Enter the biggest star of the 1950s, Burt Lancaster. He had quickly risen to fame in the late 40s in noir classics like The Killers, and had muscled as much influence as he could gain so that he was able to form his own production company alongside friend Harold Hecht. Hecht Lancaster, and later Hecht Hill Lancaster, was the biggest production company in Hollywood at the time, and by 1957 had managed to win big with a television adaptation of Marty. Not only did its lead actor Ernest Borgnine win an Oscar, it was also successful internationally, winning the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. This spurred the company on to make The Kentuckian, which Lancaster directed and starred in, and also 1956's Trapeze, which saw a young Tony Curtis for the first time partnered against Lancaster. However, once these two epics were out of the way, they wanted to return to something smaller, like Marty, to see if lightning could strike twice, and so Sweet Smell of Success was lined up as their next picture. However, initially reluctant Ernest Lehman did not want to sell the rights to his story, but eventually suggested that he would sell them as long as he was allowed to write the screenplay and direct the film. However, Harold Hecht wasn't willing to take that sort of a risk, so instead went with a seasoned theatre writer called Clifford Odets to polish up Ernest Lehman's original script, and a director was sought from an entirely different country. Alexander McKendrick had a rather interesting route to Hollywood. Originally born in Glasgow in 1912, his family left and emigrated to the US. But when his father then died, the family moved back to Glasgow, where McKendrick was raised and schooled at the Glasgow School of Art. He became an art director in films before the war broke out, at which point he was commissioned by the Ministry of Information to make British propaganda films. After the war, he joined British film company Ealing Studios, again first as a production designer and later as a director. The films he directed are some of the studio's most celebrated output, including The Ladykillers, Whiskey Galore and The Man in the White Suit. However, when the studio was sold in 1955, McKendrick started to entertain offers stateside, and eventually this led him to Hecht Hild and Lancaster's attention. Initially, it was to direct an adaptation of George Bernard Shaw's play, The Devil's Disciple. However, when the production fell through, he was moved onto Sweet Smell of Success. McKendrick was to learn that things in Hollywood were very different to that in Ealing, and in his own words, he'd been completely spoiled by his time in London, where he could just make the films without any worry of any financial matters. But in Hollywood, you needed to have the numbers front and centre. Even more so when you're working with an independent production company run by someone who also happens to be in the film you're making. McKendrick realised early on that he wouldn't be given the kind of control he was used to, and he definitely wouldn't be present for the edit. And so he took the decision to block the scenes so that the camera moved rather than cut to different camera setups. Doing this meant that when cutting the film, it made it incredibly difficult to edit around his camera moves, thus retaining his original vision. This has the effect of making the film an incredibly engrossing experience. The long takes make it feel like you just can't take a breath because the action is always being held right in front of you. Let's have a look at an example from early on in the film when Lancaster makes his arrival as J.J. Hunsecker. McKendrick positions Curtis here behind Lancaster, and Lancaster doesn't even turn around to look at him when Tony Curtis talks. This allows us to always see the two actors' reactions to what the other is saying all the time. McKendrick ended up teaching film in LA for most of his life, and he called this style of filming ricochet. One character talking to people in front of him, but actually everything he's saying, the intent behind everything Lancaster is saying in this scene, is meant for Falco, who's sitting behind him. This technique, partnered with the marvellous dialogue written by Clifford Odets, we get to understand so much about the characters without the need for extraneous exposition. With Odets' script and McKendrick's fluid direction, the film's production and artifice just disappears. Of course, this film has incredible cinematography as well by James Wong Howe, who I previously talked about in the John Frankenheimer film Seconds, and you can watch that review up here. James Wong Howe was famous for his work on city landscapes and really throwing the camera into all sorts of situations, trying to get to the reality of being on the streets, and that is exactly what the opening sequence of this film gives us. We follow JJ's eyes as they parade around this brightly lit, but conversely dark and mysterious city, all scored by Elmer Bernstein's bombastic title music. I really like that at one point we go past a movie house proudly announcing an upcoming attraction filmed in Technicolor. Maybe this is a cheeky wink from Wong Howe about the fact that the film that you're about to see is definitely not a Technicolor spectacular. Another big reason why this film works so well, I think, is just down to the performances from Tony Curtis and Burt Lancaster. Curtis was known at this time in his career as a teenage heartthrob, and indeed Clifford Odets' script makes a lot of allusions to his pretty boy image. But here is someone we just can't trust, and Sidney Falco is someone that is never redeemed. We never truly understand why he is the way he is and why he's going to such lengths to do what he does. And I love the way that Curtis plays. He's hardly ever off the screen, even just in the background, and he's always kind of moving and slinking his way around the scene. Oily comes to mind. And one element of Odets' script that he cut out of Lehman's original script was to give Falco a mother and brother. The second you remove those elements, I think it adds more mystery to Falco's motivation. He isn't doing what he's doing to support an ailing mother. He is completely self-serving. Odets also injects the script with a lot of animal analogies. This is all there, I believe, to further dehumanise Falco's character. We want to like him, but the more we see and the more we hear, the less we truly can. That's an element I really appreciate, and just makes the rewatch value of Sweet Smell of Success so much greater. Burt Lancaster was not the first choice for this role, as originally they were toying with the idea of asking Orson Welles to kind of tie in the JJ role with Citizen Kane. However, I really love Lancaster, and that is no surprise to anybody that watches my channel. And what I really love about him here is his incredibly reserved performance. He is an absolute mountain of a man, and with his acrobatic background, he is always such a graceful mover. And to have all of that shrunk down into tiny movements, they have a fluidity to them. I particularly love the way he so menacingly drinks from a tiny teacup, or sips from a little polystyrene cup of water, and he is constantly cleaning his glasses, again in an incredibly menacing fashion. And those glasses do really well throughout this film to add a layer to his soul. We can't see into his eyes properly, and so us, like Sidney, are always constantly trying to work out what reaction he's going to get from what he's telling him. And the one thing that rather unsettlingly gets Hunsecker really emotional is whenever his sister is about. Their relationship is just one of the many dark, unsaid elements of this film. When the film was released, it was an absolute box office failure. And the more money it lost, the more infighting started between Lancaster, Harold Hecht, and James Hill. Lancaster was an exceptionally strong man and found it difficult, a lot of the time, to control his temper. Alexandra McKendrick remembers a terrifying moment in a production office when Lancaster became so enraged that he gracefully leapt halfway across the room and over a sofa just to get to him, leaving McKendrick to scream out in fear of the towering actor. After the film came out, production started up again on The Devil's Disciple, with McKendrick filming it, but Lancaster fired him because he was just taking too long to shoot each scene and he didn't want another failure like Sweet Smell. Similar incidents would then occur in McKendrick's career later on. For example, he was removed from directing duties on The Guns of Navarone. He made peace with his life in Hollywood by dedicating his life to teaching the craft. And this film, like so many great works of art, has taken a while to find its audience, but is now considered one of the very best. You can see its influence in the work of Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets. And also, the dialogue by Clifford Odets is always in a Quentin Tarantino film. I loved this film the second I started watching it, and when I watched it again for this review, I got so much more from it. This is an absolute film great. It is one that if you haven't seen, you really, really, really need to sit down and watch it. And if you have watched it, please let me know your thoughts of the film in the comments down below. But for now, I'll just say thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.